This is and this is a true podcast. We got a great show for you today. We are reviewing Fargo season 4, episode 3, titled
Ratatouille.
Ratatouille. Welcome back to This is a True Podcast. We're recapping and reviewing season 4, episode 3 of Fargo entitled, Daniel?
Oh, you suck. Raddoppiarlo? Raddoppiarlo? I don't
think there's a wrong way.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to pronounce it. Nobody's gonna drag us for that. Yeah, I just wanted to clean up a couple of things that we said last week. The first one that jumped out to me when I was looking back, I rewatched episodes 1 and 2 again because FX has this like special deal with Hulu where their episodes go up immediately the day after. So I was able to watch episodes 1 and 2 again, and so it reminded me of all the mistakes that I made because it was 2 episodes back to back, and there were 2 very dense episodes, so it was a mile a minute. So the first one, really simple. I kept saying Gaetano, like with a D at the end. And the reason I did that is because there's a couple of actors who are named Gaetano that I have heard of before. So I jumped and I thought it was Gaetano. It's Gaetano. So there's no D there. Quick cleanup on that one. Very simple fix. My apologies. Another one was the way I described the Rabbi Milligan trade scene made it sound like he was Hebrew to begin with. Because I accidentally, I sort of stuttered on that, and then I just made it sound sort of awkward. He was not originally Hebrew. He was originally Irish, went to Hebrew, went back to Irish, went to Italian. So that was the double switch. It wasn't he started as Hebrew. So I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Also, we didn't have time right after the episodes to check very many details at all because we jumped right into recording this right after the episodes air. We weren't sure if the poison or the liquid that Orietta was using in the pie was actually poison or not. And so when I rewatched it, I went back and I researched what that was. And it is sort of poisonous, but it's not like, triple X poison.
Not the ricin from Breaking Bad.
Not the ricin from Breaking Bad. But that is, it induces vomiting, but it is dangerous. It's not good to consume, but it wasn't like gonna kill anybody unless it was a super high dosage, and it could have killed a young person probably if the entire pie was consumed by Ethelreda. I think it was almost more sadistic, because she has no problem murdering people, and so in this instance she was like, I'm just gonna poison them and make them vomit a lot. It was weird. Yeah, so those are just some of the things I want to clean up. Tyler, you got any cleanup for the first 2 episodes?
The actor who plays Ethelreda's father is named Andrew Bird, and he's actually a musician.
Right.
So that might be the case why his acting is a little off.
Yeah, with Andrew Bird being a musician, I figured that out again after the episode. A lot of the cast I didn't really know, even though, Jack Houston's been in quite a few things, but I still didn't really have a relationship with Jack Houston. Same with Andrew Bird and some of the other actors that are playing some of the key characters this season. And so that was one of the big things for me also. I guess this is kind of cleanup, is just having a week to sit with the episode and read some pieces from some of the more major publications about Fargo season 4. I was able to get a little bit more of a grasp on who some of these people are. So Andrew Bird being a musician, there's a podcast I listened to, and they did a recap of the first 2 episodes of Fargo as well, and they described his acting as folksy musician, and it's because he is a folksy musician. So, yeah, it's I definitely think it's a good performance, but it is totally like a musician who is kind of playing like a weird version of himself. I love it.
Yeah, cool. Let's just jump into the episode after this cleanup. We wiped our asses, and now we're moving forward. A big thing I just want to talk about in general in this episode is that I've seen the color green a lot this season so far, and this episode was very green. A clear connection drawn to the riddle from season 1, with like why humans see green more than any other color. it's because of predators. And I think what Nono Hawley's trying to do here is just to show who's predator and who's prey, and kind of like keep it interesting. This episode opens up with the introduction to Timothy Olyphant's character, who is named, Daniel,
Dick Deffy Wickware.
He's a very interesting character. He's a Mormon. He's from out of town, and he's an outsider from the town. And we didn't really know his and Otis's, who's Jack Houston, their characters' relationships. But this introduction kind of cleans that up. They don't know each other, which makes me think that Timothy Olyphant is more or less the typical good cop, kind of sheriff type of character, like he plays in everything he does now. I think he's actually contractually obligated to wear a cowboy hat in every movie he's in now, or TV series. But yeah, I thought it was like a good introduction. It kind of raises the stakes in a way. He's tracking Zelmar and Swanny, and it's from an outside perspective. So I think something Fargo does really well is they bring in outside characters that you wouldn't think they could play an integral part in the story because they don't know any of the characters. But I think this is a good example of him coming into the story and bringing something fresh and new. And I really like Timothy Olyphant's performance so far. Unfortunately, we don't see too much of him, just in the first 20 minutes or so of the episode. But yeah, what did you think of Timothy Olyphant's intro?
Well, I mean, just like you said, I thought he was really stellar in this episode. Definitely a character that I cannot wait to watch more of. He just is kind of a natural movie star or TV star. He just glimmers every time that you see him. But your point about the outsider in Fargo is really interesting and definitely true. It's also, it makes me think about how Fargo does something that you kind of aren't supposed to do in screenwriting, which is you're not supposed to tell the audience the same information multiple times. But every season of Fargo, they do it. And it's kind of like the thing that the show is built on. It's, you see a heinous act, a robbery or something go wrong, and then you see the outsider or the detective, somebody who's not emotionally invested, not within the family of whoever is, involved in the robbery or the murder. And then they retrace the steps. And we know this information already. And so that's not really what's fun about it. What's fun about it is watching them try to figure out stuff that you already know. So having more information than the character is really fun. And I think that's a real reason why Fargo is such a fun ride to go on, is because you know more than whoever the detective usually is in that season. And so you're watching them play catch up. And so Timothy Olyphant comes in and he is that guy. Sort of an eccentric. I think a lot of the writing that's been done on Fargo season 4 has been about the quirkiness of the season. And that's definitely a fair criticism because every character is a super quirky character, sort of a hat on a hat.
Yeah, Orietta's a nurse, but also she murders people, and also she's from Minnesota.
Exactly. And now with these two cops, with Otis, and the marshal and the cop, Otis and Timothy Olyphant, you got one who's this really eccentric Mormon who eats carrot sticks, and then the other one has OCD. And it's this very silly odd couple situation. Yeah, so pretty much every character has some sort of eccentricity that's just, off the wall insane. It doesn't not work for me though. I can see why people would be turned off by it, but I'm not having any issue with it so far. But just more on Olyphant. His introduction is really fun. He shows up in the cop's office and immediately goes right into Fargoisms by just monologuing about who he is a little bit. And we find out why he's called Deffy, because he only hears what he wants to. And I like the way that he sort of just takes over the whole situation. He's in full command of the room, and he's really fun to watch. Also, it starts off with the prison again, which we sort of thought was just weird in episode 2, and so they were like, screw you, we're gonna do it again. And there's also just one of the great lines of the episode, sort of a repetition, because in episode 2, when Schwartzman is talking to his sort of father-in-law character, his father-in-law tells him to go fuck a state park. which is a great line. And in this episode, Otis tells Deffy to go fuck your aunt and uncle, which is pretty great. So I think that that's a bold prediction. I think we're going to get another one of those. I think that's going to be the theme of this season.
So we get Deffy in there. It's a lot of fun with him and Wef because he's super Southern-ish, and Wef's, while he has OCD, he's also just super 1950s. Like Jack Houston's like going hardcore in like 1950s detective.
Big time, yeah.
Big time sounding like that. But yeah, this is nice. It recontextualizes the ending we saw in last episode. You know who they're after, and you know like why they're waiting for this moment. They bust in the door. They search the whole house, go down to the mortuary. Ethelrita's father's a mortician. The Smutneys lie to the police enforcement this episode and hide Zelmar and Swanny. So what did you think of that scene, Dan, overall?
I mean, well, also I got to backtrack real quick just because Thurman's putting in such work holding that pie up above his head. That's such a great Fargo moment. He's holding the pie above his head for the entirety of the scene. But other than Thurman putting in good work there, last week we talked about how there's a real love within that family, even though that there is some trouble between the sisters there. And still, she decides to lie for her sister. She doesn't turn her in. It feels like a good family. Like they're there for each other.
Right. And I feel like we talked about how last week was really different than most episodes of Fargo, but I feel like this scene really encapsulates overall theme just in general in like everything Fargo, like whether that's the TV show or movie. It's always like small town people hiding a big crime from a good police officer. And in this case scenario, we got all of that in the opening scene. Also, another funny moment was when Swanny and Zelmar were going to shoot Timothy Olyphant, and Ethelrita's like, no, don't do that. And it was just a really great performance on both parts, but Ethelrita's eyes were just, locked there, and it was really great. Another great Fargo moment there.
Very Looney Tunes, the way that Zelmar and Swanny pop out from behind that wall, and they even have the big Elmer Fudd gun,
So then the next scene is a lunch with Dr. Senator and Ebel, Violenta. And it's a great monologue for Dr. Senator here. Very dark. I feel like we haven't really gotten super dark into Dr. Senator's past or anything.
Yeah, it's a big character moment for Dr. Senator, but it's also a big moment for the actor who plays Dr. Senator, because about halfway through that monologue, I'm thinking, okay, FX should start to get the Emmys ready for like next year. Like they should start rolling out their campaigns for all of these different actors. It was a great moment, a great performance, a really interesting monologue. I mean, the subject matter obviously is dark, and it's about how African Americans have been lied to in the military, about the false promises that were given, and how they could get a double victory basically. And so that was particularly interesting subject matter. But then on top of that, it's this like unbroken single shot for most of it, just on his face. It's a great performance. I said that Dr. Senator's probably going to bite the dust at some point. And you mentioned that in the previous seasons, the father figure usually makes it out. And so I thought about that a lot this week. And I was thinking that makes sense that he would make it out in that case, because that is true, that they haven't broken that form yet. However, keeping with my prediction, thinking that this is going to be the bloodiest season, I think that this is just going to be a total form-breaking season, and I think even he is not safe. That's one of my least favorite like cliches in movies and TV shows, is when somebody orders something and then 30 seconds later the food arrives like hot and ready. Like, get out of here with that.
And after that, we go to Rabbi Milligan and Satchel, who are just hanging out in Josto's office, which is interesting. I think Rabbi Milligan is definitely up to something, whether that be he wants to join the Cannons, he is really attached to Satchel, or he's just hedging his bets. I think that might be the most Rabbi Milligan thing. I'll be interested to see where Rabbi Milligan goes here. And he did tell Satchel, you'll get back to your original team. They were talking about how players get traded from team to team. And I just thought that was an interesting analogy that Rabbi Milligan and Satchel were talking about.
Milligan definitely has a foot out the door at all times. When Satchel asks him like about his original family, Milligan says his original family was shite. And he definitely doesn't have love in his heart for the Italians either. I think it's just, like he said in episode 2, it's dog eat dog, and I don't think that he feels any real deep connection with the Italians. The scenes with Milligan and Satchel, you start to see the beginnings of some philosophies develop, which last week we mentioned that we think Satchel is Mike Milligan from season 2. There was a couple of lines where Milligan said something that reminded me of things that Mike Milligan says in season 2.
Gaetano comes in and starts talking with Rabbi Milligan, and he asks him if he remembers like killing his father. And Rabbi Milligan says like, oh, I don't fucking remember that. But he's like, that seems like a pretty big thing you would remember. But of course he remembers killing his father. There's even a flashback to that. But he's just hedging his bets, and he's like making sure he stays safe. And then Josto comes in, and it's just this really fun revolving door of like, why is everyone in my office? And they really fight until Satchel sneezes, which is also just a little fun Fargo moment. And the tension is completely broken, and Jason Schwartzman just goes back to his like classic modern day like sounding voice. And also just hinting that like maybe Gaetano's gonna be starting a coup or something sometime soon.
Well, this scene reminds me that one more additional cleanup that I wanted to do from last week's episode was we did mention that Gaetano was the older brother, but he is actually the younger brother, which is important to know because he's the younger brother but the bigger guy, and Justo's, the older brother and totally unqualified. And that's why there's really that power dynamic. So much so that he sits in the Godfather chair and fills up that chair. And then when he leaves that scene and Schwartzman sits in it, it was one of those moments where overall so far this season, I haven't totally loved Justo just because I feel like they play him for comedy a little bit too much. There's like a lot of really serious stuff going on in this guy's life that I'd like to see explored a little bit more. I'll be able to forgive that if there's a big shift moment like mid-season where he does something insane. Like if he just offs Gaetano, mind-altering, and then becomes a really serious character, then I'd be totally cool with all the quips so far. But it does seem like he's going to be sort of, just modern-day Schwartzman, but like within the body of a 1950s Italian gangster. But when he sits down then in the chair, that was one of those sort of overwritten moments where he could have just sat there and he clearly looks small in the chair compared to his brother. But instead he's like, no, it fits. I totally work in this. The chair works. But the point still remains, he's definitely, that chair is oversized for his character.
He has huge shoes to fill. And then a fun scene, Orietta applying for jobs. When I was watching this scene, I'm like, I can't believe we didn't predict this.
So
of
true.
course, like she got fired from one, so she'll apply to the other. And again, this brings Orietta more into the fold. She's really the wild card of this season. She is the only character that's really in her own story, and she doesn't like fall under like any family.
It should be mentioned that Harvard is such a good bad guy performance. Like he's such a classic, like stuck-up bad guy, and I love everything that he does. Orietta asks him if he has any favorite sweets, and he gives the greatest line, "I am partial to the macaroon." Like that was so insane.
Says it in such an evil way.
He's such a finger twirl or mustache twirling bad guy. It's just funny.
And ironically, he brings in a person that may be possessed by the devil. We're still on Devil Watch.
Yeah, we got some actual like devil stuff in this episode. I mean, there was a lot of connections in the previous episodes, a lot of religious talk and a lot of things like that. But in this episode, there's an actual conversation about the devil, and that made me we'll get there. Take a shot.
Again, it's just like she immediately gets the job. She puts on the charm. I think Orietta has a lot of charisma just as a character, and obviously Jessie Buckley does a great job. But if she wants something out of you, she'll get it. And this leads me to a fun. I think this is one of my favorite duos this season so far. Josto and Orietta. Josto's there because he's very upset with his family right now, and he just wants to murder Harvard and like get it over with. He wants to like achieve the job he failed at last week, and he's kind of like a child with it. Like he's literally like pointing a gun at him, and then of course Orietta comes out of the hospital and notices him and is like, "Oh, you're spying on me." And I wrote this down. I feel like Orietta, especially in this scene, is a huge mixture of a lot of characters we've seen before, like Lorne Malvo, obviously, but also Peggy and Nikki. Especially with Josto, I feel like Josto's very, like a Lester, an Ed Blumquist, and even Ray Stussy from last season. I think they have a unique relationship that I think leading in the direction that Orietta is going to take control of Josto in some sort of way.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think so.
And she gives him a random hand job, which was very funny. I think this is our first hand job in Fargo history. I think it's just such an interesting dynamic, and I think Orietta definitely just holds all the power in it, and that's a lot of power, especially with someone who's the head of an Italian mob family. And I think one of the funniest things in this scene is that he doesn't even know her name throughout the whole thing.
And he's done this twice now. In the last episode, when she came to the funeral, like after party thing, he also was just like, "Wait, who are you?" At first, oh, that's right, you're the nurse. So yeah, he has no. This is not an important person to him, but she keeps popping up in Devil Watch. With Devil Watch theory, that's kind of interesting because she comes in and sort of now possesses him a little bit because she's now starting to take him over.
Yeah, and then at the end of the scene, he flicks his cross. I'm really looking forward to their relationship this season. It should be a lot of fun. And again, I think Orietta has an in with Harvard now, and also with they're setting this up very beautifully. Like she already said that she's gonna bake him something. So based off the pie we'll talk about later, maybe there's something else in that macaroon.
Oh God, yeah! I can't wait for the poison macaroon. Yeah. I think I just want to underscore and emphasize your point about him being very childlike, because that is totally the first thing I thought of. Also, he's like you said, he's pretending to shoot this guy instead of actually doing it. And he also, in the previous scene, he's undersized in the chair. Everything about him is childlike. And there's gonna come a point in the season where he's gonna have to grow up. And I think that's going to be the moment where the character really flips for me.
And I will say it will be interesting to see if he goes a Lester route or an Ed route. Like, Ed stayed who he was. Ed was a cow through and through, just grazing, while Lester really changed as a character. And I didn't really think of Lester or Ed being similar to Josto, but like the more I've been thinking about it, and this scene especially, like, just shows that this is the character who either needs to change or is gonna die. I think something this episode does really well is that it hits almost every main character from every single side. With Ethelrita, it's like her aunt and the cops. With Josto, it's Orietta and his younger brother. With Loy, it's literally like Zelmar and Swanny, and then also the Fadda family. So it's really interesting how these characters are now getting just trapped. And then I just have this in my notes. There's a nice little shot of the Cannons walking down the street. They have really been holding on those shots of like just like a group of men just walking down the street, and it's typically with the Cannons, so that's pretty interesting. And we get a little Loy teaching his oldest son, Lemuel, here about money and just about dreams, I think, and it's super interesting. scene slash monologue that Chris Rock gives. Just we talked about this last week a bit, where we feel like we got some of Chris Rock, but we didn't really get his ideology yet. And this is really his ideology. Just having power in a certain way. Like, it's all about power for Loy. And this is a perfect example of how he shows this guy money, and he just takes it away from him. He shows him a future, a house, a wife, kids, and then he just takes it all away because he can.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely got, he's got his priorities. Economic justice is directly tied with racial justice, and he's trying to make that money. It was a good Chris Rock scene. I'm still on the Chris Rock train, and I think your point about them holding on the shots of the cannons like a lot is interesting, because for the most part through these 3 episodes, I felt like they've gone for more style than substance with the cannons specifically. I still feel like the cannons are sort of, as one, as an organization, but also 2, as a group of characters are a little bit underdeveloped. They're obviously there's gonna be more to come with them. Right now we're getting situated with the Smutney family and with the Fadda family first, because I think it's tougher to empathize with the villains. So it's good to start with the villains usually, which is the Fadda family. And then the Smutneys are sort of the moral center. And so that kind of leaves the cannons in sort of a weird limbo right now. But this is a good start. It's a good scene where you get to see, like you said, some of the philosophy of the Loy Cannon character. Yeah, and if the season is as bloody as we both think it's going to get, then I think that we are already starting to see the sort of moral of the lesson developing, in that all of these groups have so much in common, and yet, they're all tearing each other apart.
And then our next scene we kind of called last episode, Loy and Leon have a nice scene together. He gives Leon a job to just like drive his son around. And again, we don't know too much about Lemuel yet, but we get to know a little more about him this episode, and I think he's going to bring a very interesting dynamic to Loy, just in general. And then, yeah, Doc and Loy talk more about business, and they keep bringing up the slaughterhouse. He brought it up with his meeting with Ebel earlier in the diner, and he's bringing it up to Loy again. It's like, do you think the slaughterhouse was a good idea? Like, are we good with this? So I can definitely imagine next episode something going on down at the slaughterhouse. And
yeah, it's turned out to be a little bit more consequential than I thought. Dominated the conversations between Loy Cannon and Dr. Senator, which is interesting. But going back to Leon, everyone in the Cannon crew is like super cultured and like really intelligent. Like, they're talking about jazz in the scene. And Leon is clearly a really bright guy, and he has aspirations of getting, rising above his station. And Loy is, Loy so far has not made a lot of mistakes. He correctly identifies a lot of different situations. He's able to immediately identify, like, okay, this guy seems like pretty smart. He likes jazz, so I guess he's a bright guy. Similarly with the credit card idea, like, nothing that he's done so far is really a bad idea. The slaughterhouse could be tough. That could be one downside. That's all dependent on how the Faddas respond. And so far, the Faddas have responded very poorly, and so it's probably going to end up being a bad decision.
Exactly. And then speaking of some leadership, Gaetano and the boys are at a bar. This scene's mostly in Italian, which is always fun to see just scenes with foreign languages in American produced series. But I gotta say, the one thing that really was eye-opening to me in this scene were Gaetano's eyes. Gaetano reminds you of like Nacho Libre. He has the mustache and like somewhat curly hair like Jack Black and Nacho Libre. And he sends Calamita to go with Rabbi Milligan. This was more or less just a test for Rabbi Milligan, more so than anyone else.
Right, yeah, he directly addresses it, like he doesn't trust Rabbi Milligan, and so he wants to see if he has, if he's going to do what needs to be done for the family. And Calamita is the slickest looking dude. I mean, he's got this sweet red coat that's just so eye-catching. And he's super slim, and like he just has that sort of physique that's very 50s Italian mobster. And so I'm actually really glad that he's got some stuff to do as well, because right when you see him in the first 2 episodes, again, it shows that there's just a lack of leadership. But also I think at the end of the scene, it's really important to note that Gaetano kind of, I mean, he's a little drunk, but he gives sort of like a little rally cry moment to the 2 boys that are at the bar, and it shows that he could, if he wasn't so hungry for blood, he could probably be a pretty good leader. But also, I just real quick want to talk about the actor who plays Gaetano, because as you started with, he's going big in the eyes. The actor who plays Gaetano, his name's Salvatore Esposito, and he is an Italian actor who hasn't done any American anything really yet. He does speak English and he does speak Italian. For the most part, this is his introduction to American audiences. And I just read an interview with him before we started recording this. Some interviewer was throwing him some sort of softball questions. But then they started talking about Fargo, and they started talking about the eyes. As soon as you see him in the second episode, it jumps out at you. He mentions that there were conversations between him and Noah Hawley about how they wanted to play this guy physically. For starters, he gained about 20 pounds to play the character, which is, you got to commend that dedication. But then they were also talking about other ways to make him more intimidating, and they both decided that he should have these big, bulging, wide open eyes all the time because it makes him look more like a predator, and it definitely seems silly. And he even makes a note of that in that interview. He talks about how it sort of seems strange at first, but as the season goes along, I think you sort of get a grasp of what that's all about.
I mean, it certainly is over the top, but I definitely think it's effective.
Yeah, he's totally insane. I do think it's a great performance. We talked about this, I think, last week, about how over the top doesn't mean bad acting. Within the tone of the show, that's all that really matters. And the tone of Fargo is kind of batshit crazy all the time. So far, he fits perfectly well within the world of Fargo, even though he is really going for it with those eyes.
Anyways, after that scene, Calamita and Rabbi Milligan go to kill Lemuel, who's driving with Leon. A lot of L's in the Cannon crew, I'm realizing.
Yeah, good point. That'll be a part of our big predictions at the end of the episode, so stay tuned. What are the L's? What do the L's mean?
Losers. Anyways, Rabbi Milligan is very hesitant here. He's like, I don't really want to start a war with these people right now. Calamita's like, Gaetano said it, so we have to do it now, I guess. They pull up to a stop sign right when Leon in his car turns, and there's just like an old woman walking across the street. I found that moment very like Fargo. I was thinking like they would just like lose them and like never see them again just because this old woman was walking across the street. But they catch up to them, and Rabbi Milligan has his gun like right pointed at Leon and Lemuel. They're listening to jazz inside, and there's just this very genuine moment where like Leon like looks over and like doesn't notice it really, and then he looks back and notices it, and then Calamita tries to fire, and then Rabbi Milligan stops him. A whole scuffle, little argument, and the whole time this like light that in the intersection they're staying at is like red, and then at the end Rabbi Milligan gets out. He's like, I'm just gonna walk home, and then the red light turns green. A great performance from Ben with Shaw, and Rabbi Milligan is just a really interesting character that...
Yeah, Milligan got a lot to do this episode, which is great because, I mean, from the day that the casting was announced, we were excited about this. The scene also is one of many now in these first 3 episodes, great car scenes. And I think we didn't do a good enough job of talking about how exceptional the production design is this season. We mentioned it last week, but it's really remarkable. I mean, they have these excellent car sequences with these vintage cars, and they have to, I mean, they usually when there's a show that has a limited budget or a movie that has a smaller budget, they try to cut corners by not doing super wide angles of like large areas, especially when it's a period piece, because you just can't fake that. You have to like set dress a whole block basically. But they're not doing that this season. They're not cutting any corners. They're showing you the whole thing. I think they shot a lot. Yeah, exactly. But I think they shot a lot of this in Chicago, and they sort of retrofitted it to make it look like 1950s Kansas City. But again, like the cars are amazing. The tension that comes with the car scenes is really great. In terms of like what this means for Rabbi Milligan, it's a really compromising situation for him. This is really gonna mess up his plans, because every time that we've seen him so far, he's always got his head down. He's always looking down. Like he's not a very confident guy. He's like we said, he's got one foot out the door, and he's just kind of trying not to piss anybody off. He's just trying to stay safe. And now he's got himself in a real situation where he's kind of he can't be that guy now. Like he has to grow, he has to elevate, because he's going to go home and he's going to have to say, hey, this thing happened. And now he's the subject of like real internal debate.
But yeah, really fascinating stuff. And then we go back to the Smutney family, and very interesting scene with Swanny. Kind of talks about her ideology a bit, and also she eats the pie. And unfortunately, our predictions last week were wrong. And it was not another pie. It was the same pie. But yeah, Kelsey Asbill Chow does a great job with Swanny. And she was actually a Disney star too, which is kind of funny to think about. She was like a love interest in like one of those kid sitcoms. So, with Noah Hawley, with pretty much everyone in this cast, is that casting against type. Like Chris Rock is like a serious like force in this. He barely jokes around. Like even Jason Schwartzman as like a jokester is still like the head of a mafia family. And Swanny, played by an actress who typically plays like the typical love interest in a boys fantasy movie, is more or less like a tomboy in this, and playing a very interesting character in Swanny. That Zelmar and Swanny are a great duo, and I really think this episode was a lot of fun for them too.
I was immediately struck with the two of them, just because they have these weird little quirks, and I wasn't able to quite pin what that was last week, but I think I figured it out. It's just that all of their mannerisms inform the fact that they were caged birds who have now just been released. They're kind of twitchy, they're kind of edgy, they're kind of looking at everything like it's new. And I think that's what I love about them. They have like a love for like living life on the edge. And it's just fun to watch characters who live like that. But in the scene, yeah, Swanny talks about ghosts, and she also talks about how Zelmar said that she thought that the Smutney family was like cursed by the devil, like that the devil was following their family. Which, you want to go ahead and sound the alarm for Devil Watch?
Yeah, Devil Watch, because you know who lives across the street from the Smutney family?
The devil herself.
It was a bold prediction, and I think it's paying off.
When you said Devil Watch last week, I was like, okay. But now there's actually like some interesting... That particularly like really put me into a whole different gear with this. I now take this very seriously, so good work by you. I think that's a real... If this turns out to be true, that like that the Smutney family is sort of like followed by the devil, and now the devil is across the street. If not, I mean, not literally, of course, but just, in one form or another, the Smutney family is sort of cursed by evil. It's one of those lines that's really important, and when you go back and watch the series over again, you'll be like, oh, there they are. They tipped their hat, and then they went all the way with it later. And it's only because you've been talking about Devil Watch that I was even thinking about it.
It's and that's haunting within itself. And then Thurman, being just truly the kindest person, drives them in a hearse to the Cannon facility, and then also we might need to start a fart watch because
This
there's
is great.
a lot of farting in the next few scenes, and farting and cars, and it's just an interesting motif that Noah Hawley chose to keep coming back to. But Swanny and Zelmar are together, and it's made clear when they're driving in the hearse that.
And that was a really sweet moment too. It was really a loving moment. I loved every moment of that, except for the farts, obviously. Not a big fart humor guy, so this has definitely been challenging for me through these. In the world of Fargo, it fits, I guess. I hate to steal something from someone on Twitter. Someone said that they should rename the series Fartgo, and they gave me a chuckle.
And something I did like about the farts this episode, which I never thought I would say, just like, I really hope there's a fart in like every other episode, so we can just have like fart watch or something stupid like that.
I hope when Gaetano dies, he just lets out a huge fart. And his eyes go bigger and
Jason
bigger.
Schwartzman's Josto goes, "Oh God, ah," and it's like kind of a callback.
Smells like dad.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a callback to the first episode. But I did really like that during this robbery, where they infiltrate the Cannon facility, that Swanny is just not in any shape to be robbing anything right now. She's vomiting and farting all over the place, while Zelmar's trying to get a little money and being somewhat intimidating with a quote panty on her head, end quote there. There just is some barf on some money, and then they take some money, and then they go, never to be seen in the episode again. But just a fun, generally a fun scene. And yeah.
In the last scene, we could jump to the last scene, I guess. They do mention in that scene, like, it was two ladies and one of them was puking everywhere. So I think the fact that they mentioned it was kind of, maybe important. Maybe they gathered. I don't know. Maybe I'm just making something up completely. But I feel like they're going to gather something out of all of that. Maybe they'll see her in the next episode and she's still sick, She's still sick and they can put that together.
Exactly. And I thought this was an interesting scene because Loy figures it out. Like, he's like, all right, like, Milligan's probably chill. Like, well, like, was it really Milligan? Like, we'll see. And then he's kind of like, oh, well, like, those don't really, like, fit into, like, the Italian mafia stereotypes that the Fadda families really, like, imbue. But, like, Doc is like, well, I think these are coordinated hits. And it was just interesting to see how, like, two characters, like, just, like, putting different puzzles together at the same time. And what's really fun about Loy and Doc's relationship is that I'm like, you know what? Whoever is right, like, the other's just going to be like, yeah, you're right at the end of the day. Like, there's no, like hatred there. There's no, like, tension there where it's like, oh, is Doc gonna, like, overthrow Loy, or, like, Loy kill Doc or something, like there is with the Faddas, with Josto and Gaetano.
We already mentioned, right? I already mentioned earlier when we were talking about how Loy pretty much gets everything right so far. I do think it's interesting that the Cannons are sort of unimpeachable. Like, they're a criminal organization, but none of them are really bad guys yet, like, unless I'm forgetting something. But I'm worried that they're afraid to make any of the characters in the Cannons like bad guys.
I can definitely see, like, Leon making a bad decision. Also, Lemuel wants to do music. Like, that's his passion. He doesn't really say it's jazz, but, like, just how they talked about jazz this episode, I assume it's jazz. He wants to be a jazz musician. But yeah, it's that fun thing. Like, I, like, made a short film kind of about this, but it's like gangsters and art kind of go together in some weird ways. Like, even Gaetano, like, looking at that picture in that frame, like, just staring at it, it's just like there's something romantic about gangsters and art. And I just thought that was kind of a fun little thing they added to Lemuel. But I guess this leads into our heck moment of the week. And Dan, I'll have you go first. You got an heck moment?
I don't think there's anything other than the robbery scene. I think that's the heck moment of the week for me, certainly. It's just, we talked about the scene as being super Fargo, and that's what the heck moment of the week is. It's super Fargo. I mean, Swanny and Zelmar are just, they're a classic Fargo duo. One of them is farting and puking all over the place. It's what makes Fargo really great. It's like it's a crime, but it's also like taking the piss out of the crime.
And that is my main heck moment of the week as well. But if we're talking about a moment, it's at the beginning when Thurman's holding the pie over his head. Timothy Olyphant's like, "Put your hands up," and he's holding the pie and he puts it up. And just that image of like a small man just like, holding a pie, and the cops just burst in his door. All right, so predictions for next week. We only got one episode this week, unfortunately, but a lot to predict. This one, I think, leaves on a more mundane note of questioning if they're going to war, but right off the bat, I do think they're going to go to war.
It's a question of, well, there's two things here, because it ties into two sort of predictions, because on one hand, we have to find out what's going to happen with Rabbi Milligan and with Calamita, because it does seem like definitely going to war. It might not be this episode, but there's going to be an action taken, and it's going to be probably somebody's life.
Yeah. The first shots of, the war, I think, will be fired next week, definitely. And I think tensions will definitely grow with Josto and Gaetano.
And I think just jumping off of that also, I think Gaetano is able to get away with, I think he's going to be able to get away with a lot this season, because he's not afraid to test his brother.
What's fun about this season in particular, like any other season, if it was Josto or Gaetano, I would say Josto 9 out of 10 times is going to kill Gaetano. Noah Hawley loves the small man, like getting victory at the end. But this season's off the rails so far.
Well, I have I don't remember what I was going to say, but just speaking to your off the rails analogy, this episode did feel like it sort of started to put us on the right track. It definitely felt like I was starting to see puzzle pieces connect into where the story was going to go. It's been very clear that like Gaetano and Josto are going to be, butting heads throughout the whole season. But it was unclear where Orietta was going to factor in, and I'm still not totally clear as to how Ethelrita totally factors in. She's obviously like the moral center of the show, but it's going to be interesting to see how involved she gets in the war. Let's talk about Orietta real quick, because I think you mentioned this earlier, and it was exactly the same way that I felt. I think you could start to see those puzzle pieces connect really well, and I really hope it goes down this path. I hope that Orietta basically takes over Schwartzman, gets him all addicted to drugs and making horrible decisions, and then sort of just possesses him as devils do.
Right. And I will make the bold prediction that I think that's exactly what's going to happen this season. It's funny because last week we were kind of lost with it in many ways, but this episode, especially with that scene with him, it's just like, oh, this is like the clear trajectory. And it's like, he's just going to do more cocaine. She's just going to, push him in the direction she wants, because like that is the type of character she is. I'll make the prediction that I think Orietta, to earn Josto's trust even more, is going to kill Mr. Harvard in some way. Yeah. And again, we'll always be on Devil Watch. And I haven't listened to other Fargo podcasts, but have they even like been thinking about Devil Watch?
They're not even putting in the work that we are when it comes to Devil Watch. You know that they're not. That's why we're the most trusted Fargo podcast.
Right, and she is literally the Lauren Malvo character of this season, just a wild card, but in many ways like kind of more connected in the story, because she I feel like she kind of has a crush on Justo also, like
Totally.
she's just being like, you're spying on me and all this stuff, and it's like, do I wish Lauren Malvo had a crush on Lester in season 1? Like, yeah, that'd be cool.
Oh, yes.
That'd be so. Maybe that's why he really liked Lester.
Now, I do have a silly prediction for you. Because they've done this in the past where characters turn out to be characters in the future. So here's my one silly prediction. Totally silly, not being serious, but also just think about it. There is a good question as to why Lauren Malvo helps Lester when he almost always hurts and kills everyone else that he encounters. I think it's because Lauren Malvo is the son of Orietta Mayflower, who has a Minnesota accent. So he has a deep affection for these Minnesota people.
Lester kind of has orange hair. He definitely has the orange jacket. And, I think we have some crazy-ass predictions here with Devil Watch. And, but again, literally next week, we could be like, wow, that Lester, or that Lauren Malvo prediction was actually kind of spot on, like, for you.
Imagine, though, just think about this for a second, because we've talked about how Lauren Malvo is like the spawn of Satan. Okay, what if the spawn of Satan is the spawn of this Italian crime boss and the devil in Orietta Mayflower?
It would be incredible. Let's see if we buried anything. I guess we can talk about where we think the police are going this season.
I have a prediction about the Mike Milligan character, the Satchel character. I feel like it's a bit obvious, but I think it makes sense with how the first 24 minutes of the first episode go. I feel like there's a real good chance that the Mike Milligan character, the Satchel character, kills Chris Rock. I think there's a real chance that there's a betrayal at the end of the season, because keeping with the idea of this being a really bloody season, I don't see Loy Cannon making it out. And I don't see Fadda making it out. I don't see Gaetano-Fadda making it out. I don't see any of the heads of these organizations making it out alive. And I think that they've already set up this idea of like the betrayal of a child. And I think the fact that Satchel is learning from Rabbi Milligan, who's already killed his own father, is also pretty important. And Rabbi Milligan's whole philosophy is dog eat dog so far. And so that's just, I think that would be a really, really interesting ending. I think it would come full circle, and it would be pretty emotionally moving. Yeah, with the police enforcement, I mean, there is that moment where, let me take a step back real quick. I do have one nit that I need to pick, and that is detectives, U.S. Marshals, police officers, whoever, sniffing things at the scene of a crime or tasting things at the scene of a crime. It's so ridiculous, but it's such like a movie trope, and it's almost like a rite of passage to be a great detective. And so when Olyphant is like smelling the lipstick, and he's smelling he smells the cloth that's like in the sewage from the prison. It's so silly, but there's that, and then on top of that, there are a few moments where he really seems like a formidable officer of the law, and we mentioned in 401 and 402 that was lacking. There was a lack of the authoritative officer presence, and this episode definitely gave us that. So I'm hopeful that they just started sort of late with the officers. And I'm hopeful that he plays a big role this season. I'm hopeful that I guess the first thing that we got to sort out is him and Otis. Otis does not want to be involved in the case because he needs to get back to being, the lapdog of the Italian crime family, the Faddas. So that will have to get sorted out. And then Olyphant's going to have to figure out at some point how all these things connect. And I think the question is whether he's in this season for the long haul or if he's going to be an early exit, because he's a character that I could see going either way. I feel like he could figure it out in 2 episodes because he's super bright, and then just get gunned down in the back by like Swanny.
Yeah, especially his relationship with Jack Houston is going to be super interesting to see this season. There's a lot of tension there as well.
I do have just one more thought. It's not about characters necessarily. It's just it's sort of a cleanup. It's sort of a week-to-week change on my thoughts on how the season's going to go. But just last week I said it was going to be the bloodiest season, and I still do think that's true. But in keeping with this idea of like, what is Fargo? Fargo is always has a hopeful ending. It always ends with real, honest, sort of an Americanized ideal of hope, but still just hope. And I think that even though this will definitely be the bloodiest season, I think that the hope is probably going to come in Ethelreda.
Right. I typically agree with that too. And I think maybe it's something with Thurman and Ethelreda. I think something that Noah Hawley really likes in Fargo is, we talked about it, that father figure. And we haven't really talked about Thurman too much as a father figure, but he's definitely like the main character's father, like calling back to like a Molly and Lou. And at the end of a script that was the original cut for season 2 of Fargo, it was supposed to end with Molly, adult Molly, and old Lou fishing. And in the description for like just like how it's ending and just what they're doing, it's like and then Molly and Lou go fishing because what else is there? Like that, and it's like, and that's where we end year 2. It's like, what else is there in Fargo than like just having this nice calm moment between 2 individuals that like really love each other. But anyways, it was a nice hour and a half in Kansas City this week, and looking forward to next week.